The Billboard Top 200 charts these days is a way for us to find out here in America which rap or pop or country superstar has topped the list for this week, and it really is only week-long reigns anymore unless your name is Adele or Taylor Swift, apparently. However, heavy metal has cracked not only into the list, but has topped the list on a couple of occasions throughout its history. So here we are, let's talk about 7 times that heavy metal went number 1 on the US Billboard Top 200. And in reality, throughout these 7 occasions, we're going to be speaking about more than 7 albums. So let's get started. We start with number 7 with AC/DC for Those About to Rock. Here's a fun little fact, and it's one of the main reasons that this entry made the list. Back in Black by AC/DC never hit number 1 in America. It was a huge album in other regions of the world. However, here in America, the iconic album that has sold a bunch of copies has never ever hit number 1. Perhaps that's something that the fan base can aim to change to try to dethrone a pop princess or a rap album that's slated to come out. But either way, AC/DC's follow-up directly after Back in Black, entitled For Those About to Rock, their second album with Brian Johnson on the vocal helm, did indeed go number 1 in America, which is interesting considering it's only sold 4 million copies overall, whereas Back in Black has sold probably about 400 trillion. But either way, this is one of the earliest examples of a band that we've talked about actively on this channel topping the charts, which is interesting considering most metal legends don't have the first true number 1 album in America coming till the mid-1990s, which is simply not true. Why is that? Because of number 6, Motley Crue, Dr. Feelgood. In the late 1980s, Motley Crue were looking to reinvent themselves. They decided to go sober, hired Bob Rock as their producer, and he was able to give them a brand spanking new number 1 album with Dr. Feelgood. Many people believe that Dr. Feelgood, along with being one of their best albums sales-wise, is also one of their best albums musically, considering it has a nice little balance of songs between the aggressiveness and the sort of glammy heavy metal that you come to realize from this group, but also because of the overall shift in sound that has a little bit more of a clean and polished production built behind it. Either way, Dr. Feelgood topped the charts in the late 1980s and showed that heavy metal did have the ability to top the charts. Why include this as opposed to Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses, which also was able to accomplish the feat? Maybe I just don't like Axl Rose. There's a good possibility of that. Number 5, Slipknot with All Hope Is Gone, and then also Point 5, The Gray Chapter. Now, whenever it comes to nu metal and things like that, there have been many groups or groups sort of associated with that whole nomenclature that have made it to number 1. Linkin Park has done it, the same is true with Limp Bizkit, Disturbed is another name that comes to mind, and finally Godsmack. Whatever your opinion may be about what these bands are, whether they are truly metal or not, one that is usually disputed but universally accepted is the fact that Slipknot has a little bit of the root in the true traditional metal structure. And whenever All Hope Is Gone was able to go number 1 in the late 2000s, it almost cemented the fact that it was a possible feat to accomplish. And then whenever Point 5, The Gray Chapter followed just a couple of years ago, it sort of cemented that this band really had made it, and that Slipknot was indeed worthy of all of the hype, at least from the idea that they had the ability to sell, and they had the ability to go number 1. Having back-to-back number 1 albums is a feat that has been done multiple times in heavy metal. However, considering the small number of bands that actually achieve this feat, well, they have to be pretty special. Number 4 is Avenged Sevenfold with Nightmare and Hail to the King. After the death of the Rev, this was a critical album with Nightmare for Avenged Sevenfold. They had to find themselves a worthy replacement for the longtime drummer and much beloved drummer, and were able to select Mike Portnoy, formerly of Dream Theater. With that, they were able to release Nightmare, which is probably one of their most personal and deep albums that they would release to that point. And they were given a terrific result based off of that. They were given a number 1 album. It went number 1 its very first week and really cemented a legacy for this group that was sort of building throughout the whole entire decade of the 2000s. Yes, many people don't like Avenged Sevenfold. Many people are gaga for Avenged Sevenfold. What really are they? They should fill in with this, then this, that. One thing that needs to really be made clear is that the accomplishments of this band certainly shouldn't be taken for granted. Then, whenever Hail to the King came out in 2013, they turned the beat once again, gaining another number 1 album. 2013 was actually a pretty good year for a lot of people, with a couple of lone exceptions. However, this band really was able to do so by having songs that were a little bit relatable, and some folks would even suggest were a little bit rippy-offy, if you know what I mean. Mike Portnoy had exited the fray, but if you re-listen to Hail to the King, especially whenever you listen to the final few cuts off of this record, you perhaps get a little bit of a glimpse or a window into what the future may hold for this band. But that brings us to number 3, which is Far Beyond Driven by Pantera. This is the album that most people believe was the very first true heavy metal record and one of the only to hit a number 1 status. Once again, this is something that feels very much subject to somebody's opinion. However, one must certainly enjoy this little fact of life. It's the fact that here in America, it was stated that the 1990s were dead space. It was a dead era for heavy metal music. It was a time where metal was ushered away and sort of fluttered off to the sunset to sort of fill the path for alternative rock, regular rock, and then eventually bubblegum pop, and then the resurgence of nu metal, blah, 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 blah. If you really think that that's all of that important to and thought that heavy metal was truly dead in the 1990s, you should suck on Hitler's microscopic penis. This is instead just proof that heavy metal did have a life force beating within it. Pantera was the band that some people will claim that saved metal. However, metal didn't really need saving, but Far Beyond Driven hitting the number 1 spot is certainly not an accomplishment to be taken lightly. It was a huge accomplishment for a group that was really just removed a couple of years from being a glam metal band that didn't seem to have a prayer. Not to mention, it also cemented these 4 gentlemen as heavy metal legends, and that was something that was exceptionally important. That brings us to number 2, which is Metallica. There's 5 albums here. And this is the main reason why that whole first to number 1 is complete and utter garbage. Because if you don't want to include AC/DC, if you don't think Motley Crue is truly heavy metal enough, the Black Album turned the feet a couple of years before Far Beyond Driven did, so suck on that. And this is the one thing that makes it the most impressive, is that as of right now, if you want to go the purest route and say that there are just studio albums and then Lulu is separate, that would mean that Metallica right now is on 5 straight studio albums that have debuted or have been a number 1 selling record, with the Black Album, Load, Reload, yes, even Saint Anger, and Death Magnetic. There is no other heavy metal band on the planet right now that can come even close, because we've cited 2 of them, and they're only at 2 in a row. So, what does that say about Metallica? Does it say that the Black Album catapulted that much momentum that way? I would say absolutely. But it's interesting that this band, which has taken on so many different faces throughout this now 25-year stretch since 1990 or 1991, has still been able to produce 5 number 1 records in spite of it all. It's almost as though, regardless to what all of the talk and the jibber-jabber is about the band, people still are genuinely interested in what they do. And oh, by the way, spoiler alert, whenever their next record comes out, be it here in 2016, 2017, or a day before the new Tool record comes out, whatever century that is, it will go number 1 as well. And that brings us to number 1, which is Black Sabbath with 13. Now, this might be a very curious entry for many on the list, considering it's only 1 album and we just got done talking about a band that has had 5 straight number 1 albums. However, there's a little bit of history that surrounds this album that gives it a lot more importance. Now think about the year 2013 and think about Black Sabbath in general. Consider the lineup that was used. Yes, it wasn't the full original lineup. We had a very absent Bill Ward due to shenanigans. However, it was close enough. 3 out of 4 ain't bad. Now, if you consider the fact that those 3 hadn't performed together on a studio record, key important ideas here, full studio record. Since the late 1970s, there was basically about a 35-year gap between studio albums for these 3. And what does that also mean is the fact that in 35 years, somehow, some way, they still remained relevant. They still remained something, somewhat of a topic, either that or a band, a group, something of interest that people wanted to go out and they wanted to consume, and they wanted to consume it more than they ever had before. This was Black Sabbath's first number 1 record in the United States. That's right, despite all of the classics that came out in the 1970s, the band actually never really came all of that close to fulfilling that endeavor. Here in 2013, they were able to do it with 13, and after 35 years of not being together in this version as a band, and in reality never being together in this version considering no Bill Ward, it's still a heck of an accomplishment. think about it. Think of any band that is active today, and now take that band away for 3.5 decades. Now, certainly, there might be other versions of the group, but let's just say, for shits and giggles, that the original lineup doesn't perform together for 3.5 decades. Then have them come back and release an album. Would it go immediately to number one? Probably not. This is really a once-in-a-lifetime idea that Black Sabbath could take 35 years off with their, original lineup, or at least 75% of it. That's still a C in some schools, so shut up. And would still be able to muster up a number one record. And that's why it's number one. That's why it defeats Metallica having 5 straight number one records. Because this is honestly a number one record that, even though it's Black Sabbath, even though Ozzy's a part of this project, even though Ozfest has happened, and The Osbournes was a TV show that probably didn't need to happen, this was the number one album that probably shouldn't have gone number one. It's just a disc that should have honestly maybe cracked the top 5 and really been a great day for the Ozman and company, for the Black Sabbath camp, but number one certainly was not something that they ever expected. And to have that sort of career longevity, and to also have that career importance, that granddaddy of them all feel to heavy metal fans, to have 2 generations, and really, whenever we think about it, 35 years, that's practically 3 generations worth of metal fans to come out and give the band that status, to give that band what they didn't know at the time, but we now know is the best farewell in the studio as far as sales figures are concerned, or at least that number one status is concerned. Wow, that's a powerful thing, a powerful message to send to one of the earliest ancestors, if not the earliest ancestor to heavy metal. And that's our list. Are there any that we missed? Any that you thought should have been included on this? Leave your answer in the comments below. And we are still on the road to hopefully having a 24 hours of Cover Killer Nation marathon in April. We're looking to get $250 over on the CKN Patreon. There is a link in the description box for you to check that out. I would love it if you were to be a patron, but if you can't, I understand. But we would love to hit that goal. We still have about $150 to go. So hopefully we're able to accomplish that by the end of this month, by March the 31st, because the 24 hours of CKN marathons are always super duper cool, really, really interesting, and tons of fun. You definitely want to be a part of them. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. I am Cover Killer Nation, and I will talk to you next time.